talk with you all about a subject that I think it is just now being admitted by so many people. I remember when I was a young Christian here in the U.S., and people just didn't talk about their doubts. If they did, they talked about it as something from the past. But I think now more and more people are saying, no, this is part of life and this is part of faith. And my doubts won't hurt me as much as keeping my doubts a secret, or being afraid to admit my doubts will hurt me, or pretending that I don't have doubts will hurt me. And so I'd like to talk about faith after doubt.
Well, it's great to be with you all here at the Well once again. My name is Aaron Strutzel, and today we're going to continue on our sermon series, Faith After Doubt. Today we're going to talk about doubt as descent. Last week we kind of talked about doubt as the doorway, this idea that oftentimes doubt, when we question, when we wrestle with something, it invites us to grow. In fact, we don't actually grow or change an opinion or evolve if we don't doubt or question, whatever that is. That's true of our beliefs, but also our worldview, even our politics, right? If we don't say, hey, is this really the right way to organize our nation, right? If we don't doubt that, then we're not going to be open to something new. So today I'm going to highlight really quick what Brian McLaren calls the 4 stages of faith, and then we're going to jump into doubt as descent and explore stage 3 in particular. So really quick, the 4 stages that Brian McLaren outlines in his book, Faith After Doubt, is stage 1, simplicity, he calls, stage 2, complexity, stage 3, perplexity, and stage 4, harmony. So we're going to start with each stage, kind of talk about their beliefs, how they view the world, their strengths and weaknesses. So we're going to start with stage 1, simplicity. This idea is when we enter faith, it's this idea that you're either for us or against us. It's all or nothing. The focus is on right or wrong, good or bad. The motive is on pleasing authority figures, being an insider. We all start in stage 1. So you might look at this and be like, oh, that's bad. It's sort of like saying 3rd grade is bad, right? 3rd grade is not bad. My son just finished 3rd grade last year. I don't see it as bad. But if he was still in it this year, I mean, that's okay. But if he's still in it and he's 18 years old, be like, something's wrong. So it's a natural progression. And that's one of the strengths of this idea of stages of faith, is it helps us even chart our own faith journey. So stage 1, simplicity, the beliefs that are kind of held by people in stage 1. This idea that everything is known or knowable. There are easy answers to every question. Good authorities are us, those who are us, who are on the inside. We don't trust other people. This, by the way, it becomes very skeptical of anything. Why? It's because what you're trying to do whenever you start a faith, whether you're an adult or not, is you're trying to learn, what does it mean to be a part of this group? What do you believe? How do you practice? What's the right way to sing? All of those questions, they're not bad questions. You're just learning from that. So you look to outside external authorities to help tell you what to believe and how to live. The strengths of this stage of faith are highly committed, willing to sacrifice and suffer. The weaknesses is often is tending to even oppress, make others suffer, or kill, often in the name of God, right? It can be arrogant, simplistic, combative, judgmental, and intolerant, right? In this view, you're like, we are the truth. We have the truth, and we are the truth, and anybody else who doesn't agree with us, you're not in the know. Then the second stage is complexity, this idea that there's more than one way to do things. Really, the movement from stage 1 to stage 2 is relatively a simple transition. There's a little bit of doubt, and the doubt is more like, how do we do things? It's not so much doubt and change of beliefs, but more, how do we do things? This is the birth of the megachurch movement, is really stage 1 to stage 2. Is there really one right way to do things? Do we really have to sing like this? Can we use musical instruments? Can we use video? Can we use more entertaining ways of communicating? Can't we use, what is the most effective? Which gets to the beliefs of stage 2, complexity. Anything is doable. There are many ways to reach the goal. Authorities still are us. The bad guys are the ones that don't do it right? So this is overly pragmatic at times. It's all about how to be the most effective. And so sometimes it can seem a little bit shallow in that sense that they'll take, instead of depth, that what they want is effectiveness, right? So what matters more in this stage is how do you grow the church? How do you make it bigger, right? Rather than how do we teach the truth, which is often the focus on stage one. That's still important in stage two, but also along with that is how do we grow? How do we impact the world? The strength of complexity, again, is enthusiasm, idealism, action, the weaknesses. I kind of already touched on this already. Superficiality, tend to be naive and overly pragmatic. But what happens when you move out into stage three? It feels like you're flying on an airplane, you're getting ready, you're like, I want to jump, right? You're all excited, you're like, and somebody just shoves you, right? And you're excited, you kind of wanted to go, but somebody else pushed you, and now you have all this mix of excitement and just dread. Like, what the heck did I just do? What the heck did they just do to me? Oftentimes, it feels like it's getting done to you. And this is why Brian McLaren, in his book, says this. He says, it often takes a faith crisis to force someone into a forward transition out of stage two. And as a pastor, I've witnessed this, right? Somebody has been taught that being attracted to the same sex is a sin, and yet their friend, their neighbor comes out to them and says, you know what, I've tried. I want to follow God. I want to follow Jesus. I've prayed. I've even sought therapy. None of it worked. In fact, it made me more and more miserable. And now I've come out, I've accepted myself, and I feel liberated and free, and I experience more joy than I've ever felt before. And it leaves that person wondering, like, well, what does that mean? How do I understand this now? Or somebody says that women were raised in a faith tradition that taught women were not supposed to be pastors or can't lead. And then they were attending a conference and a woman spoke, and it was like incredible. And they're like, that was one of the most impactful, insightful things I've heard. How do I make sense? And then it begins to wrestle with, why would God allow some people to lead just because they were born with a certain gender identity, while others can't, even though they might have the gifts and talents? And a number of things can happen that force you into this sort of faith crisis. Again, like I've shared before, for me, it was accumulation of a lot of little things, but hell was a big one. How can a God so loving send millions of people to hell? The view and image of God that's often portrayed in the Old Testament, that's an overly simplistic way, but there's some passages that portray God as violent and commanding genocide. And how do I make sense with that in the light of Jesus, who portrays God in a different way, right? The third was the inerrancy of the Bible. How do I read the Bible when it draws from different literature, right? Some of it's poems, some of it's myths, some of it's stories, some of it kind of contradicts itself. How do I make sense of that? It was kind of falling apart. It shoved me out of stage two. Once again, it felt like somebody pushed me out of a plane. It was both exciting and freeing, but also eventually you're like, what did I get myself into? A little while after that time, I was in seminary class, and I was attending this class on interreligions and learning about different faith traditions. And we were invited as part of our homework assignment to attend a worship service of somebody outside your faith tradition. So if you were a Christian, you went to a mosque or a synagogue or something else, or a Buddhist meditation. So I chose, because of the climate of the U.S. at the time, I chose to attend a mosque. I was in a small town in Durango, Colorado, if you're familiar with it. Beautiful. It's not too far from you guys, so if you ever want a vacation, just hit me up. That was, a total tangent there. But yeah, 7.5 hour drive. Anyways, back on task. I drove from Durango, Colorado down to Albuquerque because that was the closest place I could see on Google that had a mosque. And I showed up super early because I didn't want to walk in and, be late and like open the door and everybody's staring at me like, what the heck are you newbie doing here? So I got up there early. My wife dropped me off. The door was locked. There was no cars in the parking lot. So it was a little eerie, and I was like, oh, great, and all this mixed emotions. So I walked around, I didn't see anybody. Finally, somebody came out, and they were super kind. They were like, hey, can I help you? And I told them why I was there. I'm taking this grad school class, and they're like, oh, let me introduce you to the imam. And their imam is basically like a Christian pastor. The imam is basically the pastoral presence for that mosque. And so I went to meet him, and he was super kind and kind of gave me a quick tour, showed me where the bathrooms were and where his office was, and kind of gave me a really brief, like, this is a little bit what's going on. We have people arriving for prayer. I'm going to go meet them. But before I do, I'm going to set you up a chair in the back so you don't feel awkward. I'm going to just let people know you're there to observe and you're taking this class, and everybody's going to be grateful for you and welcoming. So he set me up in the back, and I forget how long it was. It was maybe an hour or so, but afterwards, after the imam kind of said goodbye to a few people, he came back and started talking and eventually pulled up a chair. And 12 other people, roughly a dozen people, gathered around. And it was like what you read in the Bible stories about the rabbi's teaching, right? He started teaching and sharing about his faith and his tradition. And he asked questions, and other people engaged and shared their perspective. And I asked questions because I was trying to learn. What does it mean to be a Muslim? How do they experience themselves as Muslims in America with everything that's going on in the world? And it was one of those moments that were just absolutely incredibly beautiful. So I called my wife up like an hour and something after I was supposed to call, and she was like, are you okay? Right? And I'm like, I just had this incredible time. You see, I was taught not only that people who don't believe like me are going to hell, but people who don't believe like me, who are a part of other faith traditions, are deceived, and oftentimes hidden motives at best and evil at worst. And what I had experienced wasn't that. Loving, kind, genuine people who had encounters that were meaningful for them. They're trying to love others. And of course, I didn't have answers. I didn't know how to make sense of that. It was just thrusting me down further into stage 3. So stage 3, perplexity. It's this idea that everyone has an opinion. Who knows who is right? It's this openness, right? When you're thrust out of stage 2, you're also kind of excited because you're like, everything seemed a little bit small and boxed in, and now I have the freedom to explore. The values, the focus is on honesty, authenticity. The motives are being honest or authentic. The perception from others sometimes is you're overly relativistic or critical. So the focus is on questioning and being authentic. And, I thought it was kind of funny because a few years ago I got this tattoo right on my arm here. I took a picture of it. It's right there. It says, "To thine own self be true." And I thought, it's a quote from Shakespeare Hamlet, "To thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night is the day, thou cannot be false to anyone." And I thought to myself, as I'm reading about perplexity, I thought, could I have gotten a more stage 3 tattoo, right? To thine own self be true. I valued authenticity, right? I valued the idea of being true to yourself. So perplexity, beliefs. There's little or nothing that's known or knowable. Everybody has an opinion. Good people are honest about their questions. If you're sort of familiar with developmental theories at all, I see and I think stage 2 tends to be sort of modern, sort of enlightenment, right? Rational. And stage 3 is kind of this postmodern, this, I'm going to dive deeper into this. And I'm not going to just trust everybody else's opinion. I need to figure this out for myself. The strengths of stage 3, there's depth, honesty, sensitivity to suffering. There can be even humor through it. The weaknesses, sometimes they're cynical, uncommitted, withdrawn, critical, depressed, can be even elitist. It's difficult, if not impossible, to remain at stage 3 and be in a stage 3 community. And Brian McLaren lists all the reasons why that's the case, but often it's the case, it's because people who move out of stage 2 have experienced the hurt and the pain and the oppression of unhealthy authorities, systems, sort of what feels like constricting ways and narrow-mindedness that's intolerant of others. And so they're very skeptical of being sort of sucked back into anything like that. They've often been hurt by church, by somebody in church, by a pastor or a leader, other church members, and all of that they kind of carry with them. And so, again, I think most of our churches are in stage 1 and stage 2. So my question is, what does it look like to have a stage 4 church? Talk about that here in a moment. before we do, talking a little bit more about this idea of stage 3 perplexity and this idea of moving into stage 3 as descent. There's the story in Exodus. It's the definitive story for the Hebrew people. It's the Hebrew Exodus, right? Where Moses liberates the people out of Pharaoh's hand. It's the 10 plagues, the Red Sea. Even if you didn't grow up in church, you know these stories, right? The Israelites who now found themselves free, they're excited to experience something new. They're excited to actually live their life. They wind up in the wilderness. And very shortly they realize life is hard here. And then we pick up the story in Exodus 16, where we read this. The whole congregation of the Israelites set out from Elim, and Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, in the 15th day of the 2nd month after they had departed from the land of Egypt. The whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." And so now they're struggling, they're wrestling, they're complaining, they're bickering. They're like, where's our food? We're in the wilderness. How do we eat? Right? And then God miraculously provides for them, according to the story in Exodus, and rains down bread. We're told it's manna, rains down manna from heaven. And then just a little while later in the next chapter, Exodus 17, we pick up the story with them beginning to complain again. From the wilderness of Sin, the whole congregation of the Israelites journeyed by stages as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. The people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, "Why do you bring us out of Egypt to kill us and our children and livestock with thirst?" And so now they're complaining again. God miraculously provided for them. But here's the thing, is it wasn't a quick, you are free, here's an oasis. Now sit back, sip on pina coladas, green beer, since it was St. Patty's Day, right? Whatever, and pizza. It was, you're in the wilderness, now you don't have food and you're struggling and you're thirsty. All right? It was, you are now in the descent. Right? It was the movement from one faith into something else. Life used to be simple, uncomplicated. Everything was provided for us. Sometimes in stage 3, we're excited, right? There's some newfound freedom. But sometimes, I've experienced this myself, and I've heard others express, it was almost easier back in those other stages because things were neatly packaged, black and white, tidy for us. Now, there's a lot of uncertainty and ambiguity and nuance that it's exciting, but it's also like, what does this all mean? It can feel a little confusing and at times overwhelming. Why does the movement out of stage 2 into stage 3 often feel like a descent? Why does the movement from Egypt move into the wilderness? What is going on there? Well, I think it's because in stage 3, we are invited to descend into the depths of our souls, to uncover truth, reality, God, and ourselves in deeper and more meaningful ways. I think if we're following the path of spiritual formation, we're allowing God to stretch us. Remember, Brian McLaren talks about kind of growth of stages in rings, like on a tree, right? And we're stretched into those, which means we really grow more often than not through suffering. And the big growth that happens out of stage 2 is an enormous amount of stretching and suffering and uncertainty, and it feels like a descent. I was in the wilderness. It was in the wilderness that the Israelites learned who they were and who God was. It was in the wilderness that the Israelites learned to let go of their desire for security and certainty and to learn to trust, to experience God in the midst of the uncertainty, which was a deeper faith that allowed them then to enter into the promised land. There's an image here that I'd like to show you. This is my image. I don't know if Brian McLaren would agree with this or not, but this is how I've come to see our own faith journeys. But I think we start in simplicity, right? We start in that first stage, and then in complexity is a natural stage. And then oftentimes, if we stick with it over time, something will happen. And we begin to doubt. And that pushes us sort of over an edge where we descend into perplexity. And at some point, if we continue, we'll find our soul, we'll find our true self. Now, the thing to admit here, to be honest about, is that a lot of people leave faith in stage 3. Why? Is because stage 1 and stage 2 people, they think people in stage 3 are leaving their faith. They're dangerous. They're questioning. They're going down the wrong path, right? It doesn't seem like growth to them. Understandably. The problem is that pushes people out. Then they have a lot of hurt. And then they often leave faith entirely. But the stages of faith theory helps us see that actually the movement from stage 2 to stage 3 is healthy movement. It's a part of the process. A part of it is to go down. There's Parker Palmer talks about how true spiritual formation happens when you go in and down, not out and up. And I think oftentimes what happens in stage 1 and stage 2 is we are so focused on the external authorities, we listen to them. That's where truth is found, is external, and God is somewhere out there. But after a while, if we allow ourselves to mature and kind of get shoved over that edge and pushed out a little bit, it invites us to go in, to experience the God within us, and to learn to hear God's still small voice and to trust the authority within. The Israelites felt lost and confused after they left Egypt, wandering around in the wilderness. Abraham and Sarah were called by God to leave, to move into someplace new. Both exciting and also at times had to feel like a descent, because Abraham lied a couple times about Sarah being his sister, not his wife. Sarah said, here, I don't trust God right now. God promises us kids, but here, have my slave and have kids with her. And you can feel their struggle and angst. Esther, Queen Esther, I'm sure she risked her life not knowing she could die, and then all the rest of the Israelites could die as she went before the king. I don't think it felt like an ascension. I felt like it felt like a descension and a huge risk and a huge gamble. It was a lot of uncertainty. I imagine that's what Moses felt like when he went back to Egypt, right? He had killed somebody and then fled because of it. And then God said, I want you to go back there. And he was like, no, I don't want to do that, right? I'm sure it felt like a descent. And then, he had to put up with people grumbling around the wilderness for 40 years, right? I imagine it felt like a descent. Or imagine the disciples of Jesus at the foot of the cross. Did that feel like a glorious ascent? Jesus' mother sitting there, watching her son be crucified. People who gave up everything, right? As we're entering into Lent, we're reminded of the crucifixion and the resurrection. But first, there was death. There was a descent. Before you can ascend, I think on the spiritual path, the spiritual truth is there is a descent that happens. So I'm going to close with this question. What can faith communities do to hold space for people who are walking out of stage 2 into stage 3? Since there's so few, and the Well seeks to be one of those places, a community that can hold space, that encourages you to question. What are 6 simple practices? You probably know most of these, but I just want to encourage you with these. First is to be curious and ask questions. When you see somebody else walking through, be curious, ask questions. 2, encourage them to explore. Encourage them. Tell them, I love it when you ask this question. That's a fascinating question. That's an interesting question. Where is this coming from? Then listen to their own process. Actually listen. Be slow to give answers. Don't judge, but empathize with their struggle. Remind them that they are loved no matter what they believe. Lastly, be open, because you're going to learn something too. You are going to learn something too. See, I remember what it felt like when I felt like I was kind of at the deepest part. I was a part of a church, and I came to my pastor, and I was in seminary working to be a pastor, and I said, I'm really struggling with Jesus and who I think Jesus is in light of how everybody else lives. And I see the church, and it seems like there's so much unhealth, oppression, harm, that all throughout history, that there felt like there was this overwhelming negative aspect to it. Like, we've killed in the name of Jesus, right? People are still marginalizing whole groups of people in the name of Jesus. And it just became this, So I vented to my pastor, and he empathized and listened and asked questions and was very much like, I can see that. Yeah, there is a lot of violence. There is a lot of anger out there right now. There is a lot of hate. There's a lot of exclusion. but it doesn't have to be that way, he said. So he listened, but he encouraged me a little bit and said, but Jesus pointed in a different way. Jesus, I think, understood that, but said, there's a healthier way to be. By the way, that person, my pastor, is Pastor Ryan Gear, who's your pastor here at the Well. So I know that if you're going through this, you can reach out to Pastor Ryan and he can hold space for you. He held space for me years ago. I know others in this community will hold space for you because I know lots of other people that know what it's like to descend into perplexity. So if you're descending, if you feel like you're in that space, that sort of wilderness space right now, just know you're not alone. And hopefully you can be encouraged that it's a good thing. Even though it's a hard thing, it's a good thing to enter into. You're actually on the path to growth. Even though it feels like descent, you're on the path to growth. And if you're not walking through that, be encouraged to be open, to be curious, to listen to others, to follow those 6 steps, because you're a part of a community that I think communities like the Well are so important because they allow space for people, which is so few and far between, to move out of stage 2 into stage 3. I want to end our time with a poem that I wrote that is really about moving from the first half of life into the second half of life. But I think there's a lot here that parallels moving from stage 2 to stage 3. And that I think both involve a descent. And I'm going to talk about getting in touch and being okay with your own presence, which what I mean when I say that is the Spirit of God within you. Getting comfortable in your own solitude, knowing God is here and finding your truest, deepest self. So I'd like to go ahead and read that poem as we close. The sweetness of one's own company must be experienced through many conversations over time. Why is it that at first we are a stranger unto ourselves? There is a certain uncomfortability in youthful aloneness. What we do and what others say about us is the ego's agenda for the first half of life. We know ourselves only in relation to the mirroring of others. Acceptance and adaptation are the unseen forces that carry us along. To allow the ego to unravel, it must first build its tower. Only then can it be shoved from the top into the great descent. To move into the second half of life, one experiences not an upward ascent, not a smooth, glorious transition into something more grand, but an invitation to descend into the depths of one's own darkness. To transform, we must face the shadowlands within. One can be sure if another has not experienced this great unraveling, they are still an adolescent masquerading as an adult. Only when we surrender the ego's agenda can we create the right condition to allow over time something new, something deeper, something more true to emerge. Though we aspire to become a great butterfly, it doesn't come without great suffering. The caterpillar experiences a total disillusion. The secret, which allows us to move through the descent, that invites us to consent to the great unraveling, that urges us forward in the exploration of the caverns of one's own depths, is to learn to befriend oneself. For it's only when we discover the sweetness of our own company, it is only when we uncover the soul's agenda for our lives, can we step into the larger life that has been waiting within us all along. Let's pray. Gracious God, we thank you so much for communities like this, for each other. We thank you for the friends, the mentors, the podcasts, the books that have allowed us space to grow, to ask questions, to explore. God, we pray for those who feel like they are in descent or descending, that are feeling like they're in a wilderness. May they feel not only that they're not alone, but that they're on the right path. Keep going. May we find comfort, no matter where we are, knowing in this season of Lent that death, pain, suffering does not have the final answer. That it's through that we find new life. And God, if we're not walking through that, may we hold space for others. May we be quick to listen and slow to speak. May we encourage their struggles, their wrestlings, their questions. May we also be open to the way we might grow as we walk alongside those who wrestle. God, we ask these things through the power of Christ. Amen.